Hey guys, it's Robin, RS Island Crafts, and welcome to my craft room. I believe it was last year that I was doing videos on how to hand piece and cut out the pieces and do everything to make a hexagon for a grandmother's flower garden. And I'd always intended to turn this into a little placemat or a wall hanging or a small little tabletop or a runner and show you guys how to finish off the edges. It's just something that got pushed to the back burner and I never got to it. Recently, I received an email asking me how I would finish off one of these. And I was going to write her back and let her know how to do it. And then I thought, you know what? That is a lot of writing and a lot of talking. And it's easier to put up a video so that they could see it. You know, it's easier to see it than to hear it and try to read it in someone's email. Plus, it would give me a time to at least walk you through the process of finishing this off, since this is left over from a series from last year. I'm going to show you a few different ways that I know of how to finish off an uneven edge of a quilt, specifically the Hexagon Grandmother's Flower Garden. There may be other ways to do it that I have no idea about, but you can go ahead and leave those down in the comments and then we can all learn from that. That's what I love about this community that we've grown here, is that I start out with an idea and I only can show you what I know and what I can find online when I research things. But if you guys have experience with it, you always jump in the comments and let us know different ways to do things. Crafters are always very helpful, aren't they? So first of all, I'm going to show you the simplest way to finish off the edge of this quilt. I'm going to talk you through it because this isn't the way that I would finish this off. Now, if you just want to go ahead and get this done, you could take your rotary cutter, you could take your ruler. I would line it up right here into the V's. And maybe I would use some of my hexagons and line it up on some of my lines here just to see if I can get it nice and squared up. Find all my spots, and then I would just cut all of these points right off. And then you can either sew it on, you can add a border onto it, or you can just go ahead and quilt it and put a binding on it and finish it just like that. Now, if I had to machine stitch these all together, that might be an option for me. But I put a lot of time into even this small of a project, getting all of these hexagons prepped and stitched together. So I want to finish it off and allow it to stay as a hexagon. But before we get any farther, I just want to show you on this side, if you were going to be trimming this one, this edge has these hexagons, the bottoms of them right there. You can just go ahead and line your ruler up on those hexagons and then just trim these halves off. It works a little bit differently on each end because these top and the bottom sides here, the long edges, they have these, you know, you could put a half a hexagon in here to finish it off and that would do it. Or you can just cut these off and have those be in half. Now over here, if you wanted to finish this off like you would put the half hexagons down here, you'd have to figure out half a diamond to put on that side. And for this type of project, for me, this little one like this, that's a little bit too much math. I could just set it down on a piece of paper and trace it out and do it that way, but still, I think I'm going to go with a couple other options to show you. If I were to be making a large quilt, this is probably one of the options. This is one of my more favorite ones. This is a quick and easy one still. If you're going to have borders on your quilt, which is a nice frame to a grandmother's flowers garden, you can use one of the fabrics that are in here or use some type of a contrast. Maybe if you had the green paths, you might want to do the green fabric there, whichever works for your style of quilt. But if you put a border on it, then you can just lay this right down on top and you can machine stitch and that would hold it down. Or if you want to stay true to having everything hand stitched, you can go ahead and hand applique it down like you would any other type of applique, and that would work. You would have to determine what size border you would like. Let's say you want a 5-inch border. Then you would have to see what size hexagons you made. So now my hexagons, from the point where these come into the little inside angle here to the outer edge, I would need at least a ½ inch. So I like to add about 1 inch to that. So if I want a 5-inch border, I would add an extra 1.5 inches on in order to applique my quilt down to it. So I would have a 6.5-inch border. And then I could take my ruler and I can go 1.5 inches in from the edge, and I can use one of those little hair markers that puts a crease on it, or you can use some type of a removable pen or a pencil. They have all the different chalk pencils, or you can just put some pins along here to make yourself that nice straight line. Then you can line all your points of your hexagon up on that line so that you know you're going to have it even on your quilt. Now, if you don't want to do any of that math and you really don't care what size border you have, just go ahead and cut a piece of fabric. If you know you wanted to have a good chunky border, cut a piece of fabric anywhere from 5 to 8 inches wide, depending on how wide you want that border. Go ahead and find an equal line so you can line everything up neatly. If you don't want to line up everything neatly, there's still ways around that. You can just go ahead and flop your quilt down, stitch it down, and then trim this extra edge off so that you have it nice and even off of these points. So that's another way to kind of like cheat the system if you don't want to do all the measuring. But one of the big tricks to all of this is you want to leave your papers in your outer hexagons. On the inside of this little quilt, all the paper is gone. You can hear there's no paper in there. But all along the edges, I've left the paper in every single one of these hexagons. Now, I did not leave it in on the one that dips in. I knew I wasn't going to be putting anything there, so I didn't have to worry too much about stitching it. But what I will do is I already gave this a good press with my iron. I can go through and give it a nice, I can go through with some spray starch and give it a nice starch and make sure everything stays nice. Then if I want to take those papers out, I can. But if I'm going to hand stitch down, I kind of like to have the papers in. If I'm going to machine stitch it down, of course it's going to be better to take the papers out. But if I spray starched everything, it's going to hold it down nicely. Now that would work for a nice little project like this. I can either chop it off, add in my half ones, or put my border on. But if I were to be making a traditional grandmother's flowers garden, another way you can do it is if you're just making a big old flower garden, grandmother's flower garden, and you want to have your uneven edges and you want to leave them like this, what you can do is you can just go ahead and quilt your quilt like you normally would. You're going to trim along all of these edges, and then you're going to put binding on it. Now, this is going to be a little bit tedious, especially if you're using these small hexagons. If you're doing a large grandmother's flowers garden, sometimes they use the small hexagons and sometimes they use larger ones. If you're using the larger ones, like the 5-inch ones, especially if you're machine sewing them, that trick where you make a half a hexagon and then you sew them together. So yeah, I don't know. I don't have one of those rulers and I've never made it. But it's an easy way to sew them together by a sewing machine. So your hexagons are going to be large on the side and your edges are going to be much, much larger than mine. And that would be easy to go ahead and work your binding around. You just have to learn how to do the binding normally on this corner. But when it dips in, that's a different type of a turn. So there's a lot of videos out there on how to do that little inside binding trick on that little curve there. If I was making a traditional all by hand grandmother's flowers garden and I wanted to leave the edges to look just like this, then I would want to do a facing. Now you've seen me do facings before on standard size and on like random weird shapes where it's easy to just do a facing on that. But now with these edges are all a lot of straight edges here. To do them with the grandmother's flower garden, it's just a little bit of it's a different technique, but the same theory. And you're going to need to do a little bit more work. You're going to need to make more hexagons. You need to count up all along on all of your edges of your quilt to see how many hexagons. So you're going to need one for every hexagon that's on that quilt. So you're going to make all your hexagons. You're going to decide if you want to have a straight color like I have all blue here, or if I want to mix my red, white, and blue in together. I just happened to grab my little blue baggie. So I would figure out how many hexagons I need. I would count them without having to lay them out like this. And I would go ahead and make sure I have enough hexagons for all that. Then I would start stitching them together. Now you're only going to need to stitch them together here, and here, and here. And, you know, just keep going all the way down so that you have a frame that matches the outside border of your quilt. The outside edge, the last row of hexagons that you have on there. I don't have any sewn together today because I just received this email last night and I just decided I'm just going to go do the video this morning. So I'm not prepared for it. But when you have these all sewn together, you have them all hand stitched together like we need to, then you're going to go ahead and you're going to whip stitch and hand stitch them all together along the edge. However you join these here, you're going to do the same thing along here, so that each edge of this facing framing border of hexagons is going to be attached to the outside edge of your quilt. And you're going to do it right side facing on the top of your quilt. And then it's just going to be like normal facing. After it's all stitched all the way around, then you're just going to go ahead and bring this all the way to the back, and you're going to have that facing. Now, of course, when you do facing, you're already going to have your quilt quilted and you're going to have your backing on. You're going to cut and trim everything, your backing and your quilted batting, all the way around so it's even. So that it's like any other time when we face a quilt. Our quilts are going to be completely finished, ready for the binding stage, but instead of binding, we're going to do facing. So after you have these all stitched all the way around and you bring it back down like this, you're going to have this border all along the back of your quilt that's going to look right sides up, and it's going to be a hexagon border. So you can have it matching your backing fabric, so you can use hexagons from, let's say I just use a whole red backing, then I could have all that same backing fabric be my hexagon border, so it would blend right in. Or if you wanted to contrast, once again, if I had a red backing, I can use all my blue hexagons and it would pop, and so the back of my quilt would have this really cool frame all around it. Personally, I kind of like that way, but it depends on who you're making the quilt for and what type of quilt and fabrics you're using. And then once you get to this point, you're going to have to go ahead and, just like when we were doing the applique, when we appliqued it down to the border, you're going to have to go ahead and applique all around on these, on the inside edges here, to hold this down. Because I wouldn't want to quilt through it, because then that's going to show up, if you quilted by machine, it's going to show up on the front of your hexagons. Unless that's what you want and you want it to look like you have, because it's going to show up right through here. If you don't get it exact, and it's kind of like stitching in the ditch, but you're going to be just a little bit off, so it's going to show up on the front. So if you're going to go through the whole effort of making all these hexagons, stitching them together, hand stitching them along the edge, just go ahead and finish it off like you would binding or any other facing, and do the hand stitching to go through there, because that's the proper way to do facing, and I think it looks a lot nicer that way, so you don't see any of those stitches on the front. So that's the way I would finish off a grandmother's flowers garden. How am I going to finish this one off? I think I might want to have it, I kind of like having a little border, not with this blue fabric, because I don't really care for this one, it's a little faded looking, but I think having a nice blue border all around would really pull these blues out, and it would show up, and that way also you get the pop color of the whites and the reds against it. And since all my hexagons are a red center with blue going around, I think that kind of fits in through all the sections there. So I think that's how I'm going to finish this off. I just need to find the blue fabric, maybe something with not big stars, but maybe if I can find something with swirls, a tone on tone with either stars or swirls would look really good with this. But that means a trip to Joann's, and I'm not ready to do that yet because I know I don't have anything in my stash that would work. So this project can stay on hold for a little bit longer. Who knows, maybe it'll be on hold long enough that I'll decide that I do want to go ahead and just do the facing and stitch a bunch of these together, because I do have a whole bunch left to use up. So which technique do you think is your favorite? Which one would you use if you were doing this little wall hanging here? I think I'm going to hand quilt this too. I think this is small enough, and that with the white trails going around, that it would be nice to use maybe a red embroidery floss or a red sewing thread, and then just echo stitch outside of these flowers, and that would draw out that red color. And then if I put blue out here, it would be good, because that would be red, then blue, and then red, and then you'd have the blue again. I think that would work really well. So I hope that helped you out. If you have any questions, please leave them down in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, please go ahead and like it. And if you want to see more like it, hit that subscribe button. And if you ring that little bell, it gives you options on how many notifications you would like. If you do the all one, YouTube will let you know every time I put a new video out and you won't miss anything. Don't forget to create with Scrapitude, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye!